So here's the big question that's been bugging me ever since I walked out of the theater. What exactly was going on in The Conjuring, The Last Rites? And why did it leave us with so many unanswered threads? I've been sitting with this film for a while now, thinking about the story choices, the strange little details, and the way it blends real-life paranormal cases with Hollywood drama. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more I realize there's a hidden narrative under the surface, something the movie hinted at but never fully explained. That's what I want to dive into today. Welcome back to Hollywood Latest Updates. I'm your host Luke Harrison, and this time I'm breaking down The Conjuring, The Last Rites in a way that I think pulls together both the real Smurl family haunting and the fictionalized cinematic universe we've been following for a decade now. Just a quick heads up before we get going, there will be spoilers ahead. If you haven't seen the movie yet, this is your chance to step away, because I'm going full deep dive into the timeline, the demon connection, and how this all sets up the future of the franchise. When the movie kicks off, it immediately throws us back into the 1960s, showing Ed and Lorraine investigating what seems like just another case. But here's where the seeds of the whole story are planted. They're dealing with a mirror, or at least some kind of object that carries a demonic imprint. And the moment Lorraine touches it, there's a direct transfer, not to her, but to her unborn child. Now, this is one of those moments where you might think, okay, is this just another cinematic scare, or is this something more profound? The film plays it quickly, almost brushing past it. But to me, this is the foundation of everything that happens later. Because Lorraine being pregnant with Judy at that time wasn't just a background detail. It was the key that tethered Judy to this entity. That single touch didn't attach the demon to Lorraine, it marked Judy, who hadn't even entered the world yet. That choice by the filmmakers tells me they wanted to set Judy up as someone special. Not just another character in the Warrens' orbit, but a direct player in the supernatural war. And the tragedy here is how subtle this was in the film, because if you blink, you might miss that Judy wasn't just in danger at birth. She was spiritually compromised from the start. What really gets me thinking is the birth scene itself. The way Lorraine goes into labor immediately after that encounter, the terror of Judy being born stillborn for a few minutes, and the way the camera lingers on that demonic hand pressing against the ceiling. It's chilling, but it also says so much if you stop and analyze it. That hand isn't just a scare tactic, it's a claim. For a demon to almost snatch the soul of a newborn child suggests a bond that doesn't simply vanish because of prayers or a miracle. Sure, Lorraine's desperate pleas and faith are enough to bring Judy back, but that doesn't erase the mark, it just delays the inevitable. And this is where I think the movie was both brilliant and frustrating. Brilliant because it planted a generational threat. Frustrating because it never circled back to explain who this demon really was. With Valak in The Conjuring 2, we eventually got a name, a face, and a mythology. Here, it's almost like the filmmakers wanted us to stew in the mystery, to feel that dread of not knowing what kind of enemy has already laid claim to Judy's soul. Now, if we look at Judy's childhood through this lens, a lot of pieces start clicking into place. In Annabelle Comes Home, we saw Judy struggling with visions, with a kind of burden she never fully understood. At the time, it felt like she was simply inheriting her mother's gift as a medium. But when you add in this connection to the mirror demon, suddenly it's not just about genetics or spiritual sensitivity, it's about a claim that's been looming over her since birth. That explains why Judy always felt slightly out of place, even within her own family's extraordinary world. She wasn't just a bystander. She was the prize. And if you notice the way The Last Rites frames her, it's almost like she's living in a constant state of being haunted. The restaurant scene where Lorraine sees a phantom hand resting on Judy's shoulder, or the unsettling moment with the wedding gown. Those aren't random scares. Those are reminders that Judy isn't free, that she's still tethered to the entity that tried to claim her the moment she entered the world. The Smurls, the priests, even her own parents, none of them were the real focus. Judy was. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. The demon doesn't just attack directly, it works through other tragedies, other restless spirits. Think about how in The Conjuring 2, Valak amplified the spirit of the old man who had died in that house, twisting him into something even darker. The same pattern shows up here. The farmer who murdered his family, the fragments of grief and violence that lingered in that house, all of it became fuel for the demon. It's not content with just feeding off Judy's fear. It uses the energy of other spirits to create layers of terror, almost like a smokescreen. That axe-wielding figure we see, that's not the demon itself. That's a manipulated spirit, a victim being puppeteered into something monstrous. And I think this is where the movie missed an opportunity. Imagine if they had explained the hierarchy of how this demon works, the way it thrives on amplifying pain. That would have given us not just scares, but rules. Rules that could have made the climax more than just a battle of wills. Instead, we're left piecing together these patterns, connecting dots the movie never quite spells out. And this brings me to the Smurl family themselves. The film leans heavily on their story, dramatizing it with the inclusion of the mirror. But if you go back to the real-life accounts, there was no mirror. The Smurls simply moved into a house, and things started happening that no one could rationally explain. Stains that wouldn't wash away, odors of rot drifting from room to room, pipes that seemed to fix themselves. All of it echoes the unsettling beginnings of a haunting. At first, these sound almost mundane, but that's how most cases escalate. What I find so compelling is how closely the Smurl case parallels elements from both The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2. It's like the filmmakers cherry-picked elements of reality and fiction, sewing them together into this heightened version of events. And while that makes sense from a storytelling perspective, it also leaves us wondering what's fact and what's embellishment. The one detail that really sticks with me is how the church itself got involved. Priests blessed the house multiple times, and still, nothing changed. That detail alone tells us the Smurls were dealing with something beyond the usual restless spirit. If holy rites can't banish it, we're looking at something far older, far more malicious. Of course, the film adds its own cinematic twist. It shows Judy as the ultimate target, but in reality, the Smurl's torment felt more diffuse. Jack Smurl even reported moments where he felt physically assaulted, pinned down, while doing something as ordinary as watching TV. And here's where the Warrens enter the picture. In real life, Ed and Lorraine didn't stumble upon the Smurls. They were invited because the media had already begun covering the haunting. That makes the case unusual. Normally, the Warrens would be the first to bring attention to a haunting, but here, the haunting was already public. Lorraine eventually declared that there were 4 spirits: the farmer, his wife, his mother-in-law, and one demonic entity. And yet, despite those claims, the church never found concrete evidence. That ambiguity makes the case one of the most debated in their career. Was it real? Was it mass hysteria? Or was it, as I lean toward believing, a situation where the demon had attached itself not to the house, but to the family itself? Because if you track the activity, that theory makes the most sense. The next family who moved into that same house reported no issues at all, which means the demon wasn't tied to the geography. It was tied to the Smurls, just like Judy. The fact that the next family who moved into the Smurls' house never experienced anything unusual is honestly one of the most telling pieces of the puzzle. If the haunting had been purely about the geography, the house itself, the land, or even the bloody history tied to it, then the activity should have continued. We've seen cases like that before, where no matter who lives in a house, the same disturbances play out again and again. But that wasn't the case here. The moment the Smurls left, the haunting stopped. And that pushes us toward the uncomfortable but unavoidable conclusion. The demon wasn't interested in the house, it was interested in the family. Specifically, it was tethered to their pain, their energy, and ultimately their vulnerability. And when I think about that in the context of Judy Warren being marked decades earlier, the picture becomes even clearer. The Smurls weren't the endgame, they were the stepping stone. They were the fuel the demon needed to build up enough strength to fully make its move toward Judy. This to me reframes the entire movie. What looked like a random haunting wasn't random at all. It was a carefully orchestrated process of gathering energy, biding time until the demon could finally reach the one soul it really wanted. What strikes me is how patient this entity seems to be. Most horror movies portray demons as aggressive, quick to lash out, eager to terrify. But this one plays a longer game. It attached itself to Judy in the womb, but instead of striking immediately, it lingered in the background, almost dormant. Then, when Judy was old enough to begin forming her own sense of self, it began to stir. Lightly at first, with shadows and whispers, and then more intensely once the Smurls became its host family. That strategy tells me we're not dealing with just any wandering spirit or even a low-level demon. We're dealing with something ancient, something that thrives on patience. It reminds me of how Valak operated, but with an even more insidious twist. Valak manipulated situations to push Lorraine toward despair. This entity, however, latched onto Judy from birth and has been cultivating her fear like a farmer tending a crop. Every scare, every vision, every dark moment Judy experienced as a child was a seed planted, waiting to bear fruit later in her life, and the Smurl's suffering, that was the fertilizer. Their torment allowed the demon to feed and grow until it could focus its attention fully on Judy once again. Looking deeper at the Smurl's story, one thing I can't shake is how much of their haunting centered on physical experiences, strange smells, oppressive atmospheres, objects moving on their own. Sure, those are common, but what stands out is how visceral their attacks were. We hear about Jack being assaulted, scratched, even pulled, the daughters experiencing blood vomiting with glass shards, as the film dramatized may not be in the real life reports, but it symbolizes something important. This was a demon that wanted to break people down physically, not just mentally. That's unusual, because most documented hauntings focus heavily on psychological erosion. This one, by contrast, seemed invested in causing bodily harm. And why? My theory is that it wasn't about torment for torment's sake. It was about conditioning. By brutalizing the Smurls, the demon wasn't just feeding on fear. It was practicing. It was honing its ability to control, to manipulate, to weaken human defenses. Almost like a predator rehearsing before going after its true prey. And when you frame it that way, the entire Smurl case becomes less of a standalone haunting and more of a prelude to Judy's story. Now, one question I kept asking myself was this: why didn't the church succeed in removing it? After all, exorcisms are supposed to work, at least temporarily. And in fact, the reports do suggest that a Vatican-approved exorcism was conducted, which brought some relief. But then the activity came back even stronger. That tells us the ritual wasn't enough. Either the entity was too strong, or, and this is the chilling part, the exorcism targeted the wrong thing. If the demon was never truly tied to the house, then performing rites on the house was always going to be ineffective. It's like trying to fix a problem in the wrong location. The priest treated the symptom, not the root cause. The root was Judy, the soul tethered to this being since birth, which means the haunting could never truly be resolved until Judy herself was confronted, protected, or possibly even sacrificed. That's a horrifying thought, but it explains the futility of every attempt to cleanse the Smurl house. The priests weren't wrong in their methods. They were simply fighting in the wrong arena. This interpretation also makes the Warrens' involvement feel even more layered. Ed and Lorraine often describe themselves not just as investigators, but as warriors of faith. Lorraine's abilities as a medium gave her insight into things others couldn't see, while Ed's deep Catholic faith provided a framework for battling evil. But here's the twist: if Lorraine's contact with a mirror all those years ago created a tether, then the Warrens were inadvertently responsible for setting this chain of events in motion. That's the irony the movie barely touches on. The very people who made it their mission to help others might have unintentionally put their own daughter at risk. And I think that's part of why the film introduces Tony and Judy's relationship. On the surface, it looks like a sweet love story, maybe even a distraction. But I believe it's deliberate. The filmmakers wanted us to start seeing Judy not just as the Warrens' daughter, but as her own person, with her own battles, her own allies, and her own future. If Judy is going to take the torch from her parents in the next phase of the franchise, then The Last Rites sets her up as both cursed and chosen. Cursed because of the demon, chosen because she's the only one who can confront it. And honestly, the more I sit with that, the more it feels like a generational cycle. Think about it. Ed and Lorraine spent their entire lives confronting darkness, sacrificing their peace for the sake of others. Judy, from the very moment she was born, became part of that cycle without ever asking for it. That's the tragedy of her character. She didn't choose this. She didn't seek it out. She inherited it. And inheritance in horror storytelling is always powerful because it's something you can't escape. You can move houses, change your life, even deny your past, but inheritance sticks. And in Judy's case, that inheritance is spiritual. It's an invisible thread that connects her to forces beyond her control. That's why the demon's presence feels so suffocating throughout the film. It's not just a random haunting, it's destiny. And destiny in horror is always the scariest thing because it makes you feel like no matter what you do, no matter how much you fight, the outcome is already written. The Smurls may have suffered in the meantime, but their suffering was part of something bigger, a dark prophecy centered on Judy. This leads me to the unsettling realization that Judy's role in this franchise is only beginning. The Last Rites doesn't give us closure because it isn't meant to. It's a passing of the torch story, but not in the way we usually think. It's not just Judy taking over the investigations or following in her parents' footsteps. It's Judy becoming the battlefield itself. She's not just the next protagonist, she's the prize both good and evil are fighting for. And that's a heavy weight to carry, especially when you think about how her childhood already shaped her to live with fear. The movie sprinkles hints of this dynamic, but never fully commits to explaining it, which is why so many viewers walked away confused. But when you connect the dots, the mirror to the stillbirth, the Smurls, the failed exorcisms, the phantom hand on Judy's shoulder, you realize this isn't confusion. It's foreshadowing. And if the franchise continues, Judy is going to be the centerpiece, whether she wants it or not. That's the terrifying genius of how this film sets her up. When I think about Judy as the center of this entire web, I start noticing details that feel almost like breadcrumbs sprinkled throughout, not just the Last Rites, but the earlier entries in the Conjuring universe. In Annabelle Comes Home, Judy was portrayed as unusually sensitive, withdrawn, and haunted by things no one else around her could see. At the time, audiences might have chalked that up to being the child of paranormal investigators. Of course she'd feel out of place. Of course she'd absorb the heaviness of her parents' work. But now, with the context of the Last Rites, those moments don't feel random anymore. They feel like foreshadowing, that quiet birthday scene where no one shows up, the way she seems crushed by loneliness. That wasn't just about kids avoiding the weird girl whose parents chase ghosts. That was the isolation of someone living with a shadow already on her back, a presence she couldn't explain but could feel every waking moment. And the kicker is that even Lorraine, with her sensitivity, might not have fully understood how deeply the connection to the mirror demon ran. Judy wasn't just experiencing empathy for the supernatural, she was experiencing ownership, the demon's ownership of her soul. This completely changes how I see her relationship with Tony in The Last Rites. On paper, it's a love story meant to give Judy grounding, someone to lean on as she grows into adulthood. But if you pay attention, Tony is written almost like a shield. He doesn't see what Judy sees, but he's steady, grounded, and utterly devoted to her. That's not an accident. It's a counterbalance. If Judy is the battlefield, then Tony is the anchor tying her to the human world. The film shows this subtly in moments where Judy begins to spiral, sensing presences or being overwhelmed, and Tony pulls her back simply by being there. It's reminiscent of how Ed was to Lorraine, her rock, her tether to reality when the visions became too much. And this is where I think the filmmakers are intentionally setting up a parallel. Judy and Tony are being positioned as the next Ed and Lorraine, but with a darker twist. Whereas Ed and Lorraine chose this life of hunting demons, Judy never had a choice. She was born into it. That makes her path less about vocation and more about survival, and that subtle but important difference could make the future of the franchise feel much heavier. Because this isn't just about investigating spooky houses anymore. This is about a family's bloodline being hunted. What makes this so compelling to me is the way the demon operates almost like a parasite that adapts with each host it feeds on. With the Smurls, it manifested through violence and despair. With Judy, it manifests as psychological erosion, creating fear and isolation. That adaptability is what makes it dangerous. Most demons in the franchise have specific methods. Valak thrives on deception, Bathsheba thrived on possession. But this mirror entity seems less about one mode of attack and more about tailoring its approach to the victim. That makes it unpredictable. And unpredictability is always scarier than raw power. It suggests intelligence, patience, and strategy. And if we're to assume Judy is its true target, then it makes sense why the Smurls were never able to free themselves. They weren't meant to. They were pawns, distractions in a much larger game. That's why the church's efforts failed, why the priest couldn't cleanse the house. They were trying to remove a parasite from the wrong host, while the real target was silently being primed for later. Now, something I keep circling back to is the imagery of the hand on Judy's shoulder. The Last Rites uses this multiple times, and on first viewing, it might seem like a visual scare, the kind of moment designed to make audiences jump. But I think it's more than that. To me, the hand isn't just symbolic of the demon's presence, it's symbolic of ownership. It's the same gesture a parent might use to guide a child, or a predator might use to hold prey in place. That repetition tells me the filmmakers wanted us to see Judy as someone already claimed, already possessed in a way that doesn't look like traditional possession. Usually, possession is dramatic. Voices, levitation, violent outbursts. Judy's case is quieter, more insidious. The demon doesn't need to thrash around inside her body to prove control. It's already marked her, already bound her in a way that feels unbreakable, and that's terrifying because it suggests that no amount of faith, no amount of parental love may be enough to undo what was set in motion at her birth. If we view Judy as carrying this inherited bond, then the idea of passing the torch in the Conjuring franchise becomes less about tradition and more about inevitability. It's not just that Judy is the next protagonist because the timeline demands it. It's that Judy is the protagonist because she was destined to be the battleground from the moment Lorraine touched that mirror. And that's why The Last Rites ends without clear resolution. It doesn't wrap up neatly because Judy's story is still unfolding. The mirror might have been the catalyst. The Smurls might have been the training ground, but Judy is the war. Everything before her was preparation, both for the demon and for us as the audience. And when I think about where this could go, I can't help but imagine a Conjuring film that isn't about Ed and Lorraine saving a family from demons, but Judy saving herself, or maybe even failing to. That possibility, that sense of uncertainty, is what makes me believe the franchise still has room to grow. The other thing that fascinates me is how The Last Rites handles faith. In earlier films, Ed and Lorraine's Catholicism is a constant weapon. Crosses, prayers, exorcisms, all of it carries weight because their belief is unwavering. But Judy is different. She was raised in that environment, yes, but she wasn't forged in it the same way her parents were. Her faith, as shown in the films, is shaky, more personal, less certain. And that opens a door narratively. Because what happens when someone who doesn't have the same bedrock of conviction as Ed and Lorraine is faced with a demon of this magnitude? Can she wield the same weapons her parents did, or does she need to find new ways to fight? That struggle could define her arc going forward. It's not just about battling the demon, it's about Judy discovering whether she has the strength to believe in something bigger than herself, even after years of feeling abandoned, overlooked, and haunted. And honestly, that makes for a far richer story than simply repeating the formula of the first films. Finally, I can't shake the idea that the demon's refusal to reveal its name is itself a form of power. In Conjuring lore, names matter. When Valak's name was revealed, it stripped her of power, gave Lorraine the leverage to banish her. The fact that this entity never identifies itself suggests a deliberate withholding, as if it knows that anonymity keeps it safe. And that fits perfectly with its strategy of patience and misdirection. By staying nameless, it remains amorphous, harder to fight, harder to understand. That mystery alone makes it scarier than many of the franchise's other villains. Because with Valak, once you knew the name, you knew the rules. With this demon, we still don't know the rules. We don't know its origin, its weaknesses, or its true purpose beyond Judy. All we know is that it's there waiting and that Judy is the key. And that uncertainty for me is what makes The Last Rites both so frustrating and so brilliant. It leaves us in the dark, just like Judy, forced to wonder when the other shoe will finally drop. One thing I've been wrestling with is what it actually means for Judy to become the battleground of this story. In most of the Conjuring films, the hauntings are external, a family is tormented, an object is cursed, or a location carries the remnants of some past evil. The Warrens step in as mediators, investigators, and defenders, pushing the evil back into whatever shadows it crawled out of. But Judy's case is different, because the haunting isn't outside her, it's inside her, tethered to her from the very beginning. That shifts the entire dynamic of how this franchise works. If the battleground is Judy herself, then this isn't a story about the Warrens saving someone else. It's about whether Judy can save herself or whether her loved ones can protect her from something that's already written into her existence. And when you think about that shift, you realize how much darker the franchise is becoming. This isn't just spooky houses and jump scares anymore. This is generational horror. It's about a family tree poisoned by a curse that began decades earlier, and the frightening possibility that no matter how much love or faith surrounds Judy, the demon might still win in the end. What complicates this even further is Judy's fractured relationship with her parents' legacy. On one hand, she adores them and respects what they do. But on the other hand, she spent her entire childhood isolated because of it. Kids avoided her at school. Whispers followed her everywhere, and she constantly lived under the weight of their reputation. That kind of upbringing doesn't exactly nurture faith, it breeds resentment. And resentment is fertile ground for demonic influence. When you already feel abandoned by the world, when you already feel like you don't belong, that's when evil has the easiest time slipping in. Judy's shaky faith isn't just a character flaw, it's a vulnerability the demon is actively exploiting. Unlike Lorraine, who leaned on her visions as proof of God's existence, Judy leans away from her, seeing them more as a burden than a blessing. That means when the demon presses its hand on her shoulder, whispering that she belongs to it, Judy doesn't have the same instinctive shield her mother had. She doesn't push back with conviction. She falters, and that faltering is exactly what the demon is counting on. Now, let's talk about Tony, because I think his role is more crucial than people give him credit for. At first glance, Tony seems like the supportive boyfriend, the kind of character written in to give Judy some semblance of normalcy. But the more I think about it, the more I realize Tony represents something far deeper. Choice. Judy never had a choice in her connection to the demon, but she does have a choice in whether to let love, companionship, and human connection be stronger than fear. Tony symbolizes the possibility of building a life not defined by darkness. And that's why I think the film spends so much time on their relationship, even though some viewers found it distracting. It wasn't filler. It was a counterweight. Without Tony, Judy would collapse into isolation, exactly where the demon wants her. With Tony, she has a reason to resist, even if she doesn't always believe in herself. And if the franchise really does pass the torch to Judy and Tony, then their dynamic will be central. Not as demon hunting partners like Ed and Lorraine, but as two people struggling to keep a relationship alive under the weight of a curse that wants to destroy it. But there's another layer here that I find chilling, the way the demon uses other spirits to amplify itself. We saw this with the farmer who murdered his family, the axe-wielding apparition that stalked the Smurls. Just like Valak manipulated the old man's ghost in the Conjuring 2, Rites Ending Explained, this entity takes broken souls and twists them into weapons. That means Judy isn't just dealing with one demon, she's dealing with an entire chorus of tormented spirits that the demon is puppeteering. Imagine living with that weight, never knowing if the figure in the corner is a lost soul crying for help or another trick being used to wear her down. The ambiguity itself becomes torture. And here's the kicker. If the demon has been operating like this for decades, how many souls has it already consumed, warped, or chained to itself? The Smurls weren't the first, and Judy won't be the last. That suggests this entity is less of a singular demon and more of a collector, gathering not just fear, but lives, weaving them into its arsenal. And if that's the case, then Judy's soul isn't just a prize, it's the crown jewel in a growing collection. This is why the lack of a name bothers me so much. Names aren't just identifiers in this universe, they're keys. They're the cracks in the armor of the enemy. Valak lost power once his name was spoken aloud. Bathsheba was weakened once her identity was tied to her axe. But this demon refuses to reveal itself, and that refusal is its greatest strength. It keeps everyone in the dark, leaving even Lorraine, one of the most powerful mediums in cinematic horror, unable to grasp its full nature. And if Lorraine can't define it, how is Judy supposed to fight it? That imbalance is deliberate. The filmmakers want us to feel that despair, to feel that Judy is standing against something that doesn't play by the rules we've come to rely on. And I'll be honest, that makes me nervous. Because if Judy can't name it and can't fight it with the same weapons her parents used, then the only options left are sacrifice or surrender. Neither outcome feels like the happy resolution audiences are used to, which means if this franchise continues, we may be heading toward its darkest chapter yet. What fascinates me most is how this all mirrors real life. In the real Smurl haunting, after the family moved away and the activity stopped, many people assumed the case was closed. Skeptics claimed it was hysteria. Believers argued the demon had attached to the family and eventually the world moved on. But for the Smurls themselves, that trauma never really ended. They carried it with them, even after the phenomena subsided. That's exactly what Judy represents in the fictional narrative. Even if the house is quiet, even if the priests say the rites worked, the trauma doesn't vanish. It lingers, shaping every thought, every fear, every relationship. And that's the brilliance of blending Judy with the Smurl storyline. It forces us to confront the reality that hauntings aren't always confined to four walls. Sometimes they follow you. Sometimes they're baked into who you are, and that's far scarier than any rattling door or flickering light bulb, because it means the horror isn't out there somewhere, it's in you, and it always will be. The more I trace the threads of this story, the more I realize the Conjuring, The Last Rites, wasn't really about ending anything at all. Despite the title hinting at closure, this film feels like the opening chapter of something much larger. A handoff from Ed and Lorraine's legacy to Judy's inevitable destiny. The unresolved demon, the unanswered questions, the unexplored powers, none of it was accidental. This wasn't the franchise wrapping things up neatly. It was the franchise planting seeds for the next phase. And if we take that seriously, then Judy isn't just another character. She's the centerpiece. The one who carries both the curse of her family's past and the burden of its future. That duality is powerful because it forces us to see the Conjuring universe not just as a collection of ghost stories, but as a generational saga about inheritance, faith, and the battle between light and darkness. And when you put it in that frame, the franchise suddenly feels like it has a lot more room to grow, but also a lot more at stake. Because Judy's battle isn't just another haunting to be solved. It's personal, it's cosmic, and it may not have a happy ending. What strikes me about Judy's arc is how it reframes the Warrens themselves. For years, audiences saw Ed and Lorraine as these unshakable figures, warriors of faith who always found a way to push back the shadows. But if their daughter has been marked since birth, then it means even their victories came at a cost they didn't realize they were paying. Every exorcism, every case, every battle they fought may have unknowingly strengthened the very demon waiting for Judy. That's tragic, but it's also fascinating. It paints Ed and Lorraine not as flawless heroes, but as human beings who, despite all their faith and courage, couldn't protect the one person who mattered most to them. And that's the kind of generational storytelling that makes horror powerful. Because horror is always scarier when it's about family, when the monsters aren't just outside your door, but sitting at your table, haunting your lineage, poisoning your bloodline. Judy is the embodiment of that theme, and The Last Rites made sure we understood that, even if it didn't spell it out directly. The other piece I can't ignore is how Tony and Judy's relationship feels like the emotional heart of what's to come. As I said before, Tony is Judy's anchor, but I think he's also her shield, and possibly even her sacrifice. If the demon truly wants Judy, then it makes sense that it would target the people she loves most as leverage. That's why I suspect the franchise is setting Tony up for a pivotal role, not just as Judy's partner, but as someone whose fate will be directly tied to whether Judy resists or succumbs. We've seen this dynamic before with Ed and Lorraine, where their love gave them strength in the darkest moments. But the difference here is that Judy isn't as strong in her faith, and Tony doesn't have the same grounding in demonology or spiritual warfare. They're entering this fight far less prepared, and that vulnerability makes them compelling protagonists, because unlike Ed and Lorraine, they're not walking into battle armed with decades of experience. They're walking in with nothing but love and desperation, and that makes the stakes feel higher, because the margin for error is so much smaller. This also explains why the film leaves the demon unnamed. If Judy is going to step into her own story, then the act of naming, defining, and ultimately confronting this entity has to be hers. It can't be handed to her by her parents, by priests, or even by the audience. It has to be her revelation, her triumph, or possibly her downfall. That's why the mystery lingers. Not because the filmmakers forgot to tie up loose ends, but because the loose ends are Judy's to tie. And narratively, that's brilliant. It transforms the absence of explanation into a promise. The answers will come, but only when Judy earns them. Until then, the demon remains in the shadows, its silence a constant reminder that Judy is still vulnerable, still unprepared. And honestly, that feels more terrifying than any jump scare because it means the story isn't over. It's just waiting for the next chapter. Now, if we zoom out and think about the future of the Conjuring franchise, the direction seems clear. Ed and Lorraine have had their arc, their love story, their faith, their battles. It all came to a natural conclusion in the last rites. But Judy and Tony? Their story is just beginning. I can easily imagine a Conjuring 5 or even a spin-off series that follows them as they grapple with both ordinary life and extraordinary darkness. But unlike Ed and Lorraine, who are often sought out by families in need, Judy may not have the luxury of choosing her cases. The demon isn't waiting for her to investigate it. It's already inside her story, already pulling the strings. That makes her arc less about curiosity and more about survival. Every step she takes, every choice she makes will either feed the demon or weaken it. And that constant tension could give the franchise a darker, more intimate tone. One that shifts from grand exorcisms to psychological warfare, where the enemy isn't just in the haunted house, but in Judy's very soul. And this is where I think the Conjuring universe has the chance to do something truly bold. For years, horror franchises tend to fall into repetition. More sequels, more jump scares, more monsters. But by centering the story on Judy, the series can evolve. It can explore themes of inheritance, trauma, faith, and identity in ways that feel fresh and deeply personal. Imagine a film where Judy has to uncover the demon's name herself, not through a priest or vision, but by confronting her own lineage, her own suppressed memories of that birth encounter. Imagine a story where Tony's love is tested to the breaking point, where Judy has to decide whether to protect him or embrace her own darkness. Those are the kinds of stakes that elevate horror from entertainment to myth. The kind of stories that linger because they tap into universal fears of family, love, and loss. And I think that's exactly where this franchise is headed, whether we're ready for it or not. At the end of the day, The Last Rites is a divisive film. Some viewers were frustrated by its lack of clear answers, its emphasis on Judy and Tony's relationship, and its refusal to give the demon a name or face. But I think those choices were intentional. This wasn't a finale, it was a setup. And when I view it through that lens, I find myself appreciating it more. It's not about what it gave us now, it's about what it promised for later. And if you've been following this franchise from the beginning, you know that's always been the pattern. Every case, every haunting, every encounter has built towards something larger. And now, for the first time, that larger story isn't about Ed and Lorraine saving strangers, it's about Judy saving herself. Or failing to. And that possibility, that uncertainty, is what makes me excited for where this franchise could go next. So where does that leave us? With a haunting that wasn't tied to a house but to a family. With a demon that isn't defeated but biding its time. With a protagonist who isn't a seasoned investigator, but a young woman marked since birth, struggling with shaky faith and an uncertain future, and with a franchise that isn't ending but transforming. That to me is what makes The Last Rites so fascinating. It's not closure, it's a handoff. It's the moment where the torch is passed, not by choice but by destiny, and whether Judy accepts that destiny or tries to run from it, the story will follow her, because the demon will. And in the world of The Conjuring, there's no running from what you've inherited. You can only confront it, fight it, and hope that love, faith, and willpower are enough to hold back the darkness. And that's my full breakdown and theory on The Conjuring, The Last Rites. I know this was a long dive, but this movie deserved it. Not because it tied everything up neatly, but because it opened so many doors for interpretation. I really believe Judy is the key to the future of this universe. And the unanswered questions are deliberate setups for stories yet to come. What did you think? Did you see the same patterns I did? Or do you have your own theories about the mirror, the Smurls, and the demon's true identity? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing your perspectives, especially on films like this, where so much is left unsaid. And before we wrap up, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Hollywood latest updates so you don't miss my next breakdown. If you want to directly support the channel and help me keep making deep dive content like this, please consider using the super thanks option. Even a small contribution, like $20, goes a long way in keeping this channel alive. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Luke Harrison, and I'll see you in the next video.